All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're getting our hands dirty and going deep inside some of Yamaha's most iconic two-stroke engines. We are talking about replacing the crankshaft. Yeah, it's a big job, but it's also one of the most satisfying things you can do to bring a classic machine back from the brink.
So let me ask you, does your engine just feel off? Maybe there's a weird vibration that wasn't there before, or you hear that dreaded knocking sound, especially under load. Or maybe it just doesn't have that snap it used to. These aren't just little quirks, my friend. They're telltale signs that your crankshaft might be calling it quits.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to break down what a crankshaft actually is, why it's the heart of your engine. Then we'll look at some legendary quads and bikes and the unique challenges they bring. After that, I'll give you a step-by-step blueprint for the job itself, and we'll wrap up with the absolute golden rules you have to follow for a successful rebuild.
Okay, section 1. You're going to hear me say this a lot, but the crankshaft really is the heart of your engine, and for a very good reason. Pretty much everything relies on it to do its job right.
So what is this thing? Well, picture this. The piston is flying up and down like crazy, right? That's just straight line motion. The crankshaft is the clever piece of engineering that grabs that up and down violence and turns it into the smooth, spinning force that drives your wheels. It's the engine's backbone, and if it's not healthy, nothing else matters.
Now, what's really important to get is that these symptoms are all connected. That weird vibration, that's often a sign the crank is bent or out of balance. And that knocking noise? Yeah, that's probably your main bearings, worn out and letting the crank slop around. Worst of all are those old dried-out seals, because they can cause an air leak, making your engine run lean, and that can lead to total meltdown.
All right, let's move on and talk about some real-world machines. We're heading off-road to look at two absolute titans of the trail, the Yamaha Banshee and the Yamaha Blaster. These two are just a perfect example of how different this job can be. On one hand, you've got the Banshee. It's a twin-cylinder, 350cc legend. Having two pistons means the crank is a more complicated affair, so the job is definitely more involved. Then you have the Blaster, a super fun, lightweight 200cc single cylinder. It's a much simpler engine, which makes the whole process way more straightforward.
And hey, for all you Banshee owners tuning in, listen up, this is important. If you've modded your engine, put a big bore kit on it, a high-performance exhaust, that stock crank is now the weak link. Upgrading to a heavy-duty performance crankshaft isn't just a nice-to-have, it's absolutely essential for making sure your engine holds together.
Okay, so we've covered the dirt. Now let's bring it back to the street and talk about a couple of two-stroke legends, the Yamaha RD350 and the Holy Grail itself, the RZ500.
First, the RD350. Man, what a bike. A true street racer's dream. Now, just like the Banshee, it's a twin-cylinder. And that means when you're working on that crankshaft, you've got to have a steady hand and a ton of patience. Precision is everything.
And when you're tearing into an RD, these three things are totally non-negotiable. First, that crank has to be perfectly aligned, or it'll vibrate itself to pieces. Second, while you're at it, get it balanced. The payoff in throttle response is huge. And third, and I can't stress this enough, use new gaskets and seals. Always. Trying to reuse old ones is just asking for trouble.
Okay. Deep breaths, everyone. We've arrived at the Yamaha RZ500. This is a rare V4-powered monster, and its engine is, well, it's on another planet. Doing a crank job on this bike is not a weekend project. It demands real expertise.
So what makes the RZ500 such a beast to work on? Well, for starters, that V4 engine doesn't have one crankshaft, it has two, and they have to be perfectly synchronized or phased to work together. If the phasing is off even a tiny bit, the engine will literally be fighting itself. It's a recipe for disaster. And because this bike is so rare, you absolutely cannot skimp on parts. You have to find top quality stuff.
All right, so we've talked about the what and the why. Now it's time for the how. We're going to walk through a basic blueprint for this job, using the quads as our main example, since the fundamental steps are pretty much the same for all these machines.
So here's your roadmap in 6 basic steps. Step 1 is just prep work, getting the engine out of the frame. Step 2, you start taking things apart, removing the top end to get down to the crankcase. Step 3 is the scary part, carefully splitting the case halves. Step 4 is the main event, the heart transplant itself, swapping in the new crank and bearings. Then it's careful reassembly, using new gaskets and torquing everything to spec. And finally, the best part, putting it all back together and firing it up.
We are on the home stretch now, and this part is crucial. No matter which of these amazing machines you're working on, there are a few golden rules.
And trust me, following them is the difference between success and total heartbreak. Think of this as your final exam. On one side, you have the do's. Always use new gaskets. Always use a torque wrench. Always use the right tools. And for sure, since you're in there, always replace the bearings with the crank. On the other side are the don'ts. Don't reuse old parts, don't guess on torque specs, and for the love of all that is holy, don't try to pry things apart with a screwdriver. One side leads to glory, the other leads to a boat anchor.
Look, let's be real. This is a tough, complicated job. It takes patience, it takes the right tools, and it takes focus. But when it's all back together and you hit that starter button and that engine barks back to life, sounding crisp and running smooth, tell me, is there any better feeling in the world than that? Knowing you did it yourself. Thanks for watching.